Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we are going to talk about lighting and shadings in terms of perspectives, how to understand the light source, the light direction, and what casting shadow means. So today, as lighting is a completely new topic, we are going to cover. So we're gonna take few very simple examples like a sphere or a cube and something like that. So let's say we have let's start with a very simple example, which is a cube. So let's say we have a cube here. So we have a cube this way. I'm just drawing our cube free-handed. You can do that, of course, and if you want a proper way to draw your cube, of course, we can always use what we have learned in the last sessions, the 2-point perspective or the 1-point perspectives or the 3-point perspective. It's really up to you. So for now, we can maybe just try to create a cube very fast, like this way. Then we have our cube more accurate. So you can do it either way, but I recommend you to follow what we have learned in the last sessions, because it gives you actually much more accurate shape, as you see here. And we were able to create it really quickly, as you saw. So anyway, so today we are going to talk about shading, as we said. So shading. So when it comes to shading, there is something that you need to understand. So lighting and shading has 3 components. Yeah. So the first component is actually the light source. The second component is actually casting the shadow. Casting shadow. And the third point is highlights. Highlights. So light source is actually where our light is coming from. So it's coming from this direction, from this direction, from left, maybe from the bottom, maybe from front, and so on and so on. So this is what light source is. Casting shadow is actually the shadow that will be casted or generated from or caused by this light source. And highlight is actually when the light of the light source, we will present that, of course, in this example. I'm just explaining the theory now. Highlight is actually the light when it hits the surfaces. Like, let's assume the light is coming from this area or hitting on this cube from this area. This side is going to be absorbing light much more than that area, because this area will be sitting in the shadow area, and this area will be receiving much more light in compared to this one. So this is the 3 main components. If I want to break it down into 3 categories or 3 elements, actually these are the 3 most important components that you need to understand about lighting. So let's go back to our example. So in our example, as you see here, we have the cube. So first, we need to define our light direction. So if you are drawing, you have 2 scenarios. When it comes to light sources, you have 2 scenarios. Either you are drawing something from your imagination. In that case, you can create or you can choose on your own your light source direction, if it's gonna be this way or here or a little bit up or down. This will be affecting our shape dramatically. You will see that. And the second scenario is if you are drawing from a real life location, like for example a house or a building or a room, and in your picture or in your real life scene there is a light source, existing light source that you need to follow. So you have these two scenarios. For today we are going to take the first scenario, where we are not using any real life reference, but we can just like generate our light sources on our own and choose it. Okay, choose our own on our own. So for this example, let's say our light source is gonna be here. Okay, so let me just draw very simple lamp, just to give you the idea what are we talking about. So this is the light source. Okay, if it's a lamp or if it's sun, anything, light is light. So now, so what you need to do, let's say we have the cube and we have the light source. Now the second level, the second component, which is casting shadow. This light, theoretically speaking or logically speaking, is gonna hit this way. So this light is going to hit the cube that direction, in that direction. So it means all of these surfaces is gonna be a little bit brighter, logically speaking, much more than this one, because this one sits like 100% in the shadow area. So it means our shadow, if you also compare it in the real life location, like for example components or items, if you look at anything around you that hits a light, for example, or you can try it with your phone by turning on the flashlight and just try to hit the surfaces of an item, like anything, like a cup or anything, you will see as a shadow will be casted afterwards due to this light. And this is actually what we are trying to generate here. So long story short, I'm not going to talk a lot about it, so let's come back to practice. So this is our lamp, right? So the first thing you need to do is actually we need one single line, which is actually first, of course, the 100% vertical line. Going exactly from the light source, from our light source. Yeah, so once we do that, let me just, for example, yeah, so we have our line that is coming from our light source, so we need this first line, and the second line is actually we need the ground line, because this cube is sitting somewhere, right? So if this cube is not sitting anywhere, like flying around or in the air, so no shadow will be casted. So in order for the shadow to be casted, we need the item or our cube to be sitting somewhere, right? So that's why we need also the second line, which is the floor line or the ground line where our cube sits. So let's say our cube sits this way. Yeah, this is our ground. So now we have the line, the vertical line for our lamp, and the ground line, which ideally can be existed from the very beginning, but it's okay for now. So we can put it here, or we can move it a little bit up, by the way, because this looks a little bit odd that this part sits on the ground but this doesn't. So we can move it a little bit up, also no harm in that. So excuse me for this one because I missed it. So let's just move our ground a little bit up. Now we can say, okay, our cube really sits on the ground, you know, stable and not flying somewhere. So this is our ground. So now we have, as I said, the ground line, and we have the vertical line that we need from our lamp. The next step we need to do is actually This is our main point. We need to mark it. Once you mark it, what you need to do is actually connect this point to all points that touches the ground, which is actually these surfaces, which is point 1, point 2, and point 3. These. So that's what I meant exactly. So we need to connect this point that is generated by crossing the lamp line or the light source line with the ground line, which is this one. So once we have this point, we connect it to this point, just simple line. The same goes for this one, which is actually the ground line already. Yeah, so it means we have line 1 and line 2. We are going to use these two lines, you're gonna see in a few seconds. So once we have these lines, two lines, let's call it A and B. Yeah, once we have these, then you need to connect again this point, which is actually the light source point. As we said previously, our light is going to hit our cube this direction, so our light is going this way. Yeah, so in order to actually make that, or to generate that on our cube, we need to take this point and now connect this point to the top part of our cube, which are our 4 points, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Once we do that, you will see. So this is number 1, this is number 2, and this is number 3, and this is number 4, but it won't be visible because it sits in the back side of our cube. So it sits in the back side, so it won't be visible for us. So as you see now, so once we connected this, or once we drew this line, it automatically crosses this line. See, this point, we need it, because if you remember, we first started our two lines from this point to the bottom part of our cube, and this point to the top part of our cube. Once we do that, it automatically crosses together. So this line, this point, and as you see, if you just draw it again, it automatically crosses this line. We mark it because we need this point. Once we have point 1 and 2, we simply now connect them together. It's as simple as it is, actually, as it looks. So this shape that now we have by having the point 1, 2, 3, 4 is actually our shadow that is generated by this light source. So let me just make it darker a little bit. As you see, our shadow is actually very accurate. Why? Because we are literally drawing lines, or like the light path from our light source to the surfaces of our cube. And these, when we do that, it automatically generates these points for us that we need. It's actually like if you are, as if you were like using like a real light source, for example, like your flashlight on your phone, and making it hitting on surfaces of an item, you will be able to see exactly something like that. You can try it out at home. And this shadow, or casted shadow, generated by this light source, it should supposed to be this way, or supposed to look that way. Of course, if we have a different shape, like for example a sphere, or like maybe like a rectangle, not cube, or maybe cylinder, it's gonna look different. Of course, we are going to check that today. Yeah, today I'm going to take very simple basic shapes like cylinder, sphere, cube, maybe cone. Yeah, just to explain to you how does it work. So moving on to different shape. For example, let's take another example. Might be, or before jumping to another one, another shape, maybe we can take a similar shape, which is, instead of a cube, we can take like a cylinder. It's a little bit like in a different form, you know. So let's say we have our ground around, let me just split it in half. Maybe we can use this page for two shapes. Here we go. So let's say we have our rectangle, or our ground. Let's define our ground first. So our ground is gonna be approximately like this here. Okay, based on our own, I'm just like using my own judgment. I can put the ground here or here or here, it doesn't matter really, but for the sake of the time, yeah, let's go with this example. And our light is gonna be, let's say here. Okay, let me draw a lamp again, because it kind of like simplifies our light source. So now we have the lamp, and what we need first to do is actually, we can now first just generate or create our cube. Let's create it in a proper way, okay, using two points perspectives, okay, as we learned in the previous session. I'm gonna speed up, okay, because we already covered it in several sessions before. Maybe a little bit higher, it's too thin. Maybe this way. And on the other side as well, we connect this one to this one, as we learned in the last sessions. I'm not explaining what I'm doing now because we already covered this topic in several sessions. Of course, I'm gonna link it at the end of this video. You can watch it or you can check it out if you want. Here we go. So now we have our cube quickly created. So to reduce any confusion, let me erase the lines that we don't need, and we move on from there. Anyway, so now we have the cube and we have our light source. The next move, or the next action, is actually, as we said, we need, this is our ground, by the way. So we need to draw a line from the light source until the ground. Vertical, completely vertical line. So this is our first line that we need. So now, if you remember, as I told you, we need to connect this point to the bottom part of our shape. If it's a sphere or cylinder or cube, it doesn't matter, okay? You connect this point that touches, actually the lamp is now touching the ground, yeah? So you can remember it this way. This point that touches the ground, you should connect it with the 4 points, or with the points or the surfaces of your shape that also touches the ground. In our scenario, in our case, these points. So first we connected this one, simple line, okay? The next, this one, next this one. Now we have 1, 2, and 3. So the next move, or the next step, is connecting the light source point, which is this one. Let's call this A and this B. You can call it whatever you want, of course, but just like to differentiate between these 2 points. So now we connect B to the upper part of our surface, which is actually this one, the top one. So once we do that, let's try it out together. So this is our first point. So we need to mark the point that crosses the lines we drew from point A, which is in our case the first one, this one. And now we do the same for this point. Which is now this point. As you see, they are now crossing. And the last one is actually this one. Which now, sorry, as you see, this point, it will be automatically generated because logically speaking, they will cross with each other. Once they do, you just mark your point. Now we actually have, so the fourth point, by the way, before continuing, the fourth point, which is this one, won't be visible for us because again, it sits in the back side, so it won't be visible for our eyes. So what we need now is point 1, 2, 3. We simply now, as simple as it looks, connect them together. And now we can highlight the lines that we need. And this is actually our shadow. Let me just highlight it for you quickly. And this surface will be also a little bit dark because it sits in the shadow. So today we are not going to cover shading that much because shading has different technique and so on. I have a session, actually like about 20-minute session about shading in my channel, but I didn't really cover everything about shading. So I would like to really talk about shading way much in details, and not only in one session but different sessions, but probably not in this one, because this one I want to explain to you what casting shadow means, what light source means, because you really need to understand what light source is, because only when you understand and you get it fully, you fully get it, and you know what light source is and how it affects the surfaces and how the surfaces of your object interact with this light source. Only when you have this knowledge, you will be able to do much proper shading. If you do it the other way, the opposite, like for example, to try to learn shading and shading techniques, because shading has also a lot of techniques, you know. I'm gonna cover it, of course, afterwards in the upcoming sessions. But if you do it the other way, like upside down, it doesn't work this way. You need to first have this understanding what light source is and how it affects our surfaces in our object, then you move on to the next step, which is actually the shading and shading techniques. So enough theory for now, let's continue. So for the sake of our session, I'm gonna just like stop here shading our cube or our rectangle, because I just wanted to give you the idea that these surfaces will be darker than this one because our light is actually hitting this surface. So logically speaking, this will be dark, this will be bright, and this will be darker. And this is our shadow, which will be much darker than these surfaces. But again, I'm not gonna talk about shading that much in this session, okay? Because I just wanted you to focus on the light source and to understand the logic behind it, you know? Because this is very, very important. So now, before moving on to the next shape, let's take the same example, the same shape, but in different light direction. It may be a little bit lower or a little bit move to the right. Why I want to do that? Because the light source or the location of light source defines how your shadow is going to look like. It has like a huge effect on it. So this shadow looks that way because our light source sits in that area. So if our light source sits here, this shadow is going to look completely different. And this is what I want to show you here. So bear with me a little bit to the end of this video. I promise you it's gonna be worth it. So again, this is our ground. I'm gonna try not to change our shape per se, like the size of it or anything. So this is the light source. Of course, I'm gonna change the light source for now, but here, yeah, I'm trying to get very similar shape, you know, because I want to show you the difference in that when the light source changes and not the shape itself, as for now. So we have the top surface of our cube. So a little bit different, just tiny bit, but it's okay. So with the free hand, as you see here, I'm not using any ruler, so it won't be like 100% matching unless I really take time. And I'm not gonna do that because this is not a point. I'm doing this now. Let's reduce these lines because we don't really need them. Here we go. So now we have similar shape. Yeah. So let's say we have the light in a different direction and different height. Yeah, let's change both. So the direction, let's say our light is gonna be here and at this height. So again, we have the lamp. Or the sun, anything, light source, any light source. So we have the ground, the ground line. This is A and this is B. Yeah. The next one, as we did here, the next step, we need a vertical line from the light source way to the ground then we have our point, which is point A, and point B is actually this one. Exactly the same approach, nothing changes. Okay, so once we do that, now we again start connecting the point of the light source that touches the ground, which is A, to the points that touches the ground of our cube, which are 1, 2, and 3. 4 is again on the back side, it's not visible. Yeah, so we have now, sorry, we have now line 1 and line 2 and let me reduce these because they cause some confusion and they are not necessary. Also the cube perspective lines, yeah, vanishing lines. So we have this point and this line, and we have this line, and the last one is actually this one. We have now this line. So the next step is, as we said, we connect the P point to the upper points, the upper surfaces of our cube, which is again this one. As you see, it automatically immediately crosses this line. We mark our point. We need this one. Again, we do the same from B to this point, the top one, the upper one. Then it crosses again. We need this point. And again, the last one is this point. And again, it crosses this by this point. So now we have 1.3. We simply connect them. And as you see now, we have the shape of our shadow. So as you see, let me just highlight it for you. So this is actually the shadow of our cube. You might ask yourself, why does it look much bigger than this and much more like scaled up a little bit? The reason is very simple and is actually very accurate. The reason is actually our cube, our light source is much lower in compared to this one. If you compare it, the height, see, it's much lower. So when you can also try it by yourself actually on a real life example. Like if you like turn on the flashlight in your phone and you try to hit the surfaces of any shape, cube or a glass, anything you have, if you hit the surfaces from the top part, so from the top view, then the shadow will be like much smaller, like this way. And the lower you lower your hand, which is like grabbing the phone with the flashlight, the more stretched the shadow will be. And you can try it out actually. You will know exactly what I mean. So, and this is exactly what we have here. So the light in this example, the light is way higher than this one, and that's why our shadow here doesn't look that much stretched. But once we have the light source is a little bit lower, it causes our shadow to be upscaled and kind of like stretch a little bit more. Physically, it's very accurate actually. This is how physics works, and that's why we need so we have these way too many lines now, like line from the light source, line from the ground, line from the perspective, vanishing point, lines from the bottom part of the cube and the top part of cube. Why I'm using all of that? Because actually there is a logic behind it, and there is a math behind it, and physics, you know. And this is how it works. This is how light source and casting shadow works. So in order to understand that, in order to understand that and really grasp that very well, you need to understand this logic behind it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you always, so by every drawing you do, you need to do these lines. Of course they are going to be helpful if you do that in your drawing, yeah, but sometimes it's not possible, because doing this every time will cause you way too much complication in your drawing, and it's gonna have like way too many lines, sometimes unnecessary. But once you have this logic behind you and you really understand the logic behind it, then you automatically will start to think in a proper way that if you have this cube and the light source is in this location, your shadow, your item shadow, or your object shadow is gonna look approximately like this. This knowledge needs to be trained really, like again. Once you do that, you will have this knowledge, trust me, and the skill. So you don't necessarily have, or you won't need to always draw these lines and to make your drawing complicated. But the reason I'm doing that now, because I need to explain to you how it works and the logic behind it. So going back to our example, so the light is coming from that area, right? So it means this surface is gonna be darker, and the same goes for this one. Again, it's not shading, okay? We are not shading today. Shading is gonna be in different session. When we talk about shading, I'm gonna cover this topic and including the shading technique and how do we properly shade. So anyway, this is going to be a little bit darker. It's okay if we crack it up a little bit. Here we go. So this is actually our shadow. So yeah, I promised you to take another example beside the cube and rectangle. So let's talk about, for example, if we have a sphere, how our shape looks like. So let's say we have very simple sphere. By sphere is actually much easier. You will see it's very simple. So before moving on to sphere, let's talk about cylinder. So from cube to cylinder to sphere, okay? So cylinder, let's assume we have, let me just divide it into two, because I'm gonna use this page for two shapes. So this is our cylinder. Let me just lower it down a little bit, maybe around here. So this is our cylinder, and it sits on the ground again. Our ground line, or horizontal line, you can call it as well. This is the ground, and our light is coming, let's say, from this area. Okay, so this is our lamp again. Just quick, simple, that simplifies our lamp here, or light source. So again, we need the vertical line from our light source. Now we have our points, which is this one, point A, and we have the point B. For, as you notice, we always need point A, point B, okay? So again, now we don't have this 1.34 points that we had in the last one, like this one in the cube, if you remember. Yeah, so we don't have really like very clear visible lines, dots, sorry, or points, but we have kind of like rounded edges here. So let me just make it a little bit rounder, like this way. Okay, so as you see, we don't really have any dots or points. So what we do is actually we just connect this point to the most visible or closest point to us in the cylinder. So it's not going to be this one or this one, it's going to be this one, because it actually sits exactly on the corner of the edges on this chamfer. So once we do that, we have now this line, and again with this one exactly at the corner. Okay, now we have 1 and 2, these two lines, because we are going to use them as exactly as we did for the cube. So the same we do for the top part from point B. So we do this one, then we have our first point, and we do also for this corner as well. We have now our second corner, second point, as you see here. So this is the first line we need, which is actually the shadow of this line, and we need this line, which is actually the shadow of this line. You see this one, the one I marked in a little bit darker line. So 1 and 2. So these 2 points, they need to be connected to actually emphasize this shape. So the way of doing it, you can either randomly draw this, which gives you the feeling that it looks like this is the shadow of the cylinder, or you can choose 2 points here, very simple points, yeah, like 2 or 1. 2 is actually ideal and recommended. You connect now point B to this point, which I manually generated to help me figure out how my shadow will look like here. So once we do that, it gets much easier actually. Now we have this line. Let's do the same for this point. And now we have, let me remove the one I did manually because I don't want to confuse you. Yeah, so as you see, now we have these lines connected to each other. And now, as you see, we have line 1 and 2, which actually help us to generate our lines that it's going to look like approximately like this. I just connect them together. I didn't connect them this way because this way will not match actually the shape of our cylinder, sorry. So because our cylinder is very rounded, as you see here, so the shadow also needs to be aligned with this shape as well. So we need to take that into consideration to make the shadow matches our main shape. See? So this is actually how our shadow gonna look like. So we can round it or chamfer these corner a little bit, because it's not gonna be very, very hard as we had in the box. Because the box has very chamfered and very hard surfaces like this, it's gonna generate very sharp shadow. But the cylinder has different approach. So these corner can be chamfered a little bit or smoothed out to really emphasize the cylinder shape. So now if we now highlight it and make it a little bit darker, this is actually going to be our shadow, the shadow of our cylinder. Here we go. So this is how it looks like. So now let me maybe just highlight it a little bit. To help me just a little bit keep our shape clear. Here we go. Yeah. So before closing our session for today, let's take the last example, which is going to be our sphere. So as we said, we need to take sphere as well to really check together and see together how the shadow will be casted if we have a sphere as an object. Here we go. So the sphere is gonna be, let's say, right here. I'm gonna change the light source direction, okay? Because I don't wanna do the very same direction every time. So we can maybe have our sphere right here. And maybe a little bit up is too far, actually, very low. Just a little bit up, maybe this way. It's okay. Yeah, approximately. So the ground line won't be visible, of course, because it's gonna sit behind the sphere. So this is our sphere, okay? So let me just reduce the lines a little bit. Sorry for that. Yeah. So this is our sphere or ball, call it whatever you want, and this is our light. Let's say here, okay? This is our lamp, and again we need the vertical line as we always did, point A and point B. And now, again, what we need to do is connect point A to the surface that actually touches the ground, which is this one. This is the first surface that is actually closer to this point and touches the ground. So you can make it as a rule, actually. So point A always needs to be connected to the surface that touches the ground, which is actually this one, because here is exactly where it starts to touch the ground. So once we do that, we have line 1 and we have line 2. It's gonna be too much stretch. I think I need to move it a little bit up, because otherwise our shadow is gonna be that, like in that area, way too stretched. So we can avoid that by moving our light a little bit up. It's okay to do that. Let's say here, okay, our B point is gonna be this way. So once we do that, now we connect the top surface, which is this one, to this point. So once we do that, as you see, we have line 1 and line 2. So now the tricky point is there is a just a very small tiny tricky point when it comes to rounded shape. So the rounded shape in so when it comes to lighting is a little bit tricky. Why? Because the shadow is going to look like a sphere, but it's way too much stretched out, you know. So the way of doing it is also possible, is also doable, but you have to understand how your shape is going to look like. So once we have this line and this line, as you see, now we can define the point that is actually existing in the middle of the sphere. Exactly in the middle. I'm going to tell you why. We need this only for the very rounded shapes, because this one is a little bit exceptional. So once we do that, now we connect it to point A. Yeah. So once we do that, as you see, we need this point. This point is actually where this sphere is touching the ground or sitting on the ground the most, which means, so in this area, it is starting to touch the ground, but in this area, in this point, which is generated by aligning this line from the middle of the sphere to point B, is actually where the main or the core point where our sphere sits on the ground. So once we have this point, which is generated by creating this point, which is existing exactly in the middle of our sphere, and connecting it to point B, once we do that, we have this point. So this point is actually going to be the starting point of our shadow. So our shadow is going to look like approximately like this. So our shadow is not going to be this way or this way or this way. Why? Because as I said, we need this point to define where our shadow starts. And how to decide how curved these lines are going to be looking like, you can actually do two things. You can, from this point, you can draw a horizontal line and vertical line. Once we do that, we have now this point and this point and this point and this point. These are very important if you want to really draw it accurately, and you really want to figure out how your curve is going to look like. So you do these points, which are the vertical and horizontal. Once we do that, we connect them to point B, which is our light source. We have this point, and again to point B, we have this point, and the same goes for this point. We have this one, and the same goes for this one, which is actually going to be around that area. So it means our shadow, when we connect these points together, is actually going to be our shadow. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But our shape is actually sphere, so we cannot really connect them in a very hard line. You know what I mean? So that's why we need to consider making them a little bit smoother. So once we connect them, point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we actually have our shadow. As you see here. So with the sphere, it's a little bit complicated. I know that, I'm aware of this. But you need to understand the logic behind it. Because once you have it, just the technical understanding, yeah, you will be able to really cast shadow and draw lighting and shadows for any object that you have. It doesn't matter how your shape you look like if a sphere or a cylinder or a stairs or anything, literally everything. So this is actually how our shadow is going to look like. Of course, this is the shaded area because this part of the sphere sits in the shadow. And this one, also these surfaces are going to be brighter because this is where the lights, our light source, start to hit the surfaces, right? Yeah, here we go. So as a quick recap, because I know for the sphere it was way a little bit too much in terms of lines and in terms of rules, I know, but let's recap a little bit quickly. So we have the surface, we have the cube, the sphere, we have the light source, we have point A, which is the ground, and we have point B. So the first thing we do is we connect the points that touch the ground from our sphere, which is this point, and this point, but it won't be visible actually because it's actually aligning with our ground here. So you can move to the next step, which is connecting point B to this point, and again this point, as we did. Once we do that, you have point 1 and 2. The next step is actually defining where the center of your sphere is, which is this one. Once you do that, we need 2 lines, vertical and horizontal. Once we have them, you have point 1, 2, 3, 4. Then from these 4 points, you again draw lines from point B, generate this point for you, from this point, generate this point for you, from this point, generate this point for you, and from this point, generate this point for you, and this point, generate this one. Once you connect them, you actually get the shadow. This is the shadow of our sphere. The shadow is gonna be stretched out and moved to this direction the lower our lighting source gets. So if this light source goes down, this shadow is gonna move this way and this way, and the same goes also for this way. If our light source moves to the left, it means this shadow is gonna move accordingly to the right, and so on and so on. And that's what I meant with the direction of the light source is way too important, because this is actually what defines how your shadow looks like, and so on. So without taking more difficult examples and making the session longer than necessary, so let's stop right here for this session, taking only like few simple example. You can try it out, of course, at home if you like, just to understand the logic behind it. As you saw, it's not that complicated. Once you understand it and you have the logic, then it gets much easier. I promise you that. So just try it out, and yeah, try to do it step by step, and you will definitely get a similar result, because there is a logic, and once you follow it, you get a similar result. It doesn't matter if your shape is bigger or smaller or thinner. Logic is logic, you know. So yeah, try it out, and yeah, thank you very much. This was for today, and see you in the next session. Bye bye.